Welcome to Talking History, a series of talks from the Farnham U3A World History, Ancient, Medieval and Modern group. Please note, the views expressed in this talk are representative of the views held at the time of the material being discussed. They do not necessarily represent the views of the speaker. The Farnham U3A World History, Ancient, Medieval and Modern group, nor the team at the Mr. T podcast studio. In the third of our short talks, Graham Meade tells us about Mother Teresa.
On 26th of August 1910 in Skopje, I was born Agnes Gonj Bojadjou, the youngest of three children. By blood, I'm Albanian. By citizenship, an Indian. By faith, a Catholic nun. My name translated is Mary Teresa. My father was killed when I was 8, leaving my mother to raise us children. Our home was devoutly Catholic, and my mother was always very kind to people who were less fortunate than us. She often invited poor people to share food with the family. Our household was also very religious, and the Sacred Heart's Church and one of its priests were also hugely important in helping teach me about faith, but also introducing me to some of the missionary work being undertaken in the wider world, particularly in India. By the age of 12, I'd already decided I wanted to dedicate my life to God. I left our family home in Skopje when I was 18 to join the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, known as the Sisters of Loreto, an Irish community of nuns who sent missionaries to India. I trained for only 6 weeks in Ireland, and the main focus of this was learning English. After my training, I was sent to India with the huge sum of 5 rupees to carry out teaching work in an impoverished community. As soon as we arrived in India, I was shocked by the scale of the poverty, which was on a completely different level to what I'd experienced in post-war Skopje. I learned Bengali and later Hindi. During my first missionary post at St Mary's High School in Calcutta, my job was teaching young children history and geography. We were given no supplies or equipment, so I taught by writing in the mud with wooden sticks and making use of what little other resources I could find. During this early period as a missionary, I had no income and little access to food, so I was constantly hungry and was forced to beg from strangers on the street. This experience gave me a first-hand understanding of the suffering experienced by the many poor, destitute, ill and dying people who slept rough on the streets of India. I made my final vows of profession on the 24th of May 1937. At that point, I became the spouse of Jesus for all eternity, and from that time on, I was called Mother Teresa. I carried on teaching at St Mary's and became the school's principal in 1944. My 20 years there were profoundly happy. I worked extremely hard, and people said I had a natural talent for organisation. It was on September the 10th, 1946, during a train ride from Calcutta to Darjeeling to go to my annual retreat, that I received my inspiration, my call within a call. I've never been able to fully explain this, but Jesus' thirst for love and for souls took hold of my heart, and the desire to satiate his thirst became the driving force of my life. Jesus revealed his pain at the neglect of the poor, his sorrow at their ignorance of him, and his longing for their love. He asked me to establish a religious community, missionaries of charity, dedicated to the service of the poorest of the poor. From this point onwards, the foundations for everything we did were constant. All our works were done for the love of God. After a short course with the medical mission sisters in Patna, I returned to Calcutta and found temporary lodging with the Little Sisters of the Poor. On December the 21st, I went for the first time to the slums. I visited families, washed the sores of some children, cared for an old man lying sick on the road, and nursed a woman dying of hunger and tuberculosis. I started each day with communion and then went out with my rosary in my hand to find and serve God amongst the unwanted, the unloved, and the uncared for. After some months, I was joined one by my former students. I petitioned the municipal authorities to provide me with some premises. It took 2 years before I was given permission and a pilgrim hostel near the sacred temple of Kali, and was able to begin. In October 1950, the new congregation of the Missionaries of Charity was officially established in the Archdiocese of Calcutta with the approval of the Vatican. I chose to wear a white Indian sari with a blue border out of respect for the traditional Indian dress, but also as blue as the colour of the Virgin Mary. For many years, I and a small band of fellow nuns survived on minimal income and food, often having to beg for funds. But slowly our efforts with the very poorest were noted and appreciated by the local community and Indian politicians. Our donations grew, and we even got some regular income from the municipality. I'm aware there's been some criticism of the care we provided, with some people suggesting we could have done a lot more. However, we never intended to provide full medical care or act as hospitals. We had neither the equipment nor the expertise. As I said previously, our role was to help people who were destitute and on the streets, or orphaned or dying, by giving them shelter, food, basic comfort, for them to know that someone cared and to help them find God. For the orphans, we also tried to provide some sort of education and give them some work skills, like carpentry or needlework, so they could lift themselves back into society. And we always did our work totally independently of the entrenched caste system. When we were fully established in Calcutta, I wanted to do more. So in the early 1960s, I started to send our sisters to other parts of India, initially Ranchi, Delhi and Jhansi. We also started a branch of the Mission of Charities for priests, our brothers, who were able to complement the work we did. The degree of praise granted by Pope Paul VI in February 1965 encouraged me to open a house in Venezuela, and this was followed by foundations in Rome, Tanzania, and eventually on every continent. From very early on, we learned how to ask for support and receive kind donations for our work, and as time went on, our profile grew. Some of those donations became quite substantial. I think it's fair to say we were also sometimes a little unconventional in how we dealt with some of the gifts. For example, during his visit to India in 1964, Pope Paul VI gifted me his ceremonial limousine. We could have sold it, as we obviously had no use for it, but we worked out that we would make more money if we raffled it, so we raffled it and gave the money to help our leper colony. In 1969, the BBC produced a documentary about our work, and this was really the spur for our mission becoming known in the West. As a result of this, the Mission of Charities started spreading across the world, opening 15 to 20 new sites each year. I was very fortunate to receive many accolades during our work, around 120 in total, the two most notable being the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. Then in 1980, the Indian government conferred the Bharat Ratna, the country's highest civilian honour. I didn't attend the Nobel Prize banquet, and I asked that the $192,000 prize money be given to the poor in India. The awards were for our work, not for us personally, but they did give the mission huge publicity. After the Nobel Prize, donations started flooding in. We opened a branch of Mission of Charity in New York named Holy Ghost and collected 50 million in donations in the US in that 1 year. There's no official records of how much was given in donations over the entire course of our work, but some people have estimated it to be around $1 billion. Starting in 1980 and then continuing through the 90s, I opened houses in almost all of the communist countries, including the former Soviet Union, Albania and Cuba. Some of our facilities in India were developed with more specific goals. For example, we had a hospice for the terminally ill, hostels for the blind, the aged and the disabled. And by this time we were also providing support for people suffering from AIDS. I was always very conscious not just of the poor and sick, but those suffering as a result of specific incidents. So I helped wherever I could. I went to the war zone in Beirut during the siege of 1982 and against all advice helped evacuate children. I went to Chernobyl after the nuclear accident to assist radiation victims, as well as to the earthquake zone in Armenia. By 1997, our sisters numbered nearly 4,000 nuns and thousands of lay workers and were established in 610 foundations in 123 countries. In one way or another, we'd helped millions of people. On September the 5th, 1997, I passed away. I was given the honour of a state funeral by the Government of India, and my body was buried in the Mother House of the Missionaries of Charity. I'm truly humbled that I was canonised by Pope Francis I on September the 4th, 2016. It was the ultimate honour for our selfless work for God of giving everything we could for those who needed help most and inspiring millions of others to do the same.
This podcast has been produced by the Mr. T Podcast Studio in association with the Farnham U3A World History, Ancient, Medieval and Modern Group. Thank you very much for listening to this talk.